Welcome to Open Education Analytics. My name is Chad, and today I will give you a short tour of beginnings of the OEA schema approach. So with this talk, I'll touch on three main pieces. One will introduce OEA schemas from scratch, so I'll give you a feeling for what they're all about and how they can be applied and how they accelerate a number of things in the education space. I'll also give a demo of how to convert your data into the OEA schemas, right, for future use. And then at the end, I'll give some highlights around schema categories and roadmaps in the works. All right, so first, what are OEA schemas? The short story is they're data standards to support education use cases, right? So basically, trying to standardize our data really allows for acceleration for getting started and sharing out of OEA technical assets. So our main goal is when you can set up OEA, you can set it up very quickly from end to end, right? So starting with data sources all the way out to final deliverables like PowerPoint dashboards or Power BI dashboards and things like this. So OEA schemas are really the key, I think, to accelerating that process. The major challenge that OEA schemas try to tackle is that initial data sources for varying environments can differ. So how do we standardize things so that we can share in an open research environment and build assets that are transferable across different environments? And the key, I think, is to layer these OEA schemas on top of those data sources, right? So here in this picture, I gave sort of a diagram of a number of different data sources categorized into different groups. The three groups, I'll focus mostly on the top group today, so the OEA digital activity schema. So these data sources might be OEA modules, such as the Microsoft Insights module or perhaps Clever. They also could be some custom data source that you have just specific to your environment. But this schema is flexible enough that it can tackle all those data sources and standardize them into one format. And I'll show that format here in a second. The key, though, is if OEA packages, use cases, code, libraries, things like this are built on top of these schemas, then they're easily transferable across spaces. So that's sort of the ambition. For today, I'm going to give a deep dive into the digital activity schema, the first starts on this approach. And I'm going to demo it for two specific data sources. One is Microsoft Insights, and the other is Clever. And I'll showcase how do you combine these into one single standardized schema. And it's pretty easy to see how you would do this for a number of other data sources as well. So I'll showcase the GitHub repo right now, but there's a lot of information around our approach for OEA schemas, and this is being developed in the moment. The thing I want to mention here, though, is these schemas are derived from education data standards, right? So there's a lot of data standards out there. There's a lot of schemas existing. We look to sort of those schemas for sort of inspiration, but also guidance for best practices. And really what we're doing for these first attacks, these attempts of OEA schemas, is we're modifying and extracting and simplifying some of these well-known standards. So right now we're considering EdFi and SIF, but also Caliper Analytics is one of the ones I'll be talking about today. And this is the structure of the digital engagement OEA schema. And you can see on the top that it's derived from the IMS Caliper Analytics schema. And basically we take parts of that schema in a very simplified way with the main goal of supporting use cases, right? So extracting just the data we need to build some specific package. So we'll see that they're really usually pretty simplified. So in this case, just a single table and only zeroing in on specific information we need for a dashboard, for example. In this table, you can see every column is listed here. So there's maybe a total of 10-ish columns. And there's a description of each column given. And the columns are really all around signal information, so some sort of digital activity. So an event ID, an event type, the event actor, and so on. And at the end, there's a list of aggregate measures, right, which are really used to sort of quantify the digital activity. So things like number of times access or time on task. So I want to quickly jump to a short demo to show you how you can transfer two data sources, in this case OEA module data sources, into the OEA schema. So I'm going to jump first to the GitHub repo. So this is the OEA GitHub repo. And this has recently had a bit of a restructuring. There is now a schemas folder here, which focuses on the OEA schemas. In this case, I'll look at the schema catalog, but there is a lot of information here to be had pointing towards those other standards that I mentioned. But within the schema catalog, there's a digital engagement schema. And this is our first schema that's been used in practice, I think. It's been grown out and it's fully functional. It is being iterated, though, and improved upon. But you can see in the documentation the schema table that I showed you in a second. And there's also step-by-step instructions for getting the schema set up. We also point towards some related OEA modules. And these modules are ones that we already have set up to be plugged straight into the OEA schema. So for example, Microsoft Insights is one of our modules. Once you stand this up and set this module up, there's some additional steps for funneling this into the OEA schema. And these steps are listed here, right? So on the setup instructions. And the instructions are quite simple. There's really two notebooks that are provided. One is a general Python class, which gives the sort of bones of the schema, how it's defined. And then there's a demo notebook, which shows you how to funnel data into that schema. Within this Python class that shows sort of all the basic functions of the schema, you can see things like the column names and also some column descriptions, and then some functions that help you sort of do that transfer. But this is illustrated, of course, through the demo notebook, right, which shows how to take a data source, how to match it up to the schema, and how to actually execute the code and generate a schema table. I'm going to jump to a Synapse notebook to show what this looks like in a data environment. So this is a dev notebook or a dev Synapse workspace that I've set up, and it's pretty basic in the sense that there's only a few modules that are located in the data storage. And the few modules, you can see that they're in stage 1 NP. There's only two. So there's Clever Data and there's the M365 data. And I've also loaded those two notebooks following the GitHub schema setup instructions into a folder here. So there's my demo notebook and there's my Python notebook. When I open this demo notebook and execute it, what this will do is it'll look towards the digital activity data that I have in the link according to how I connect to that schema. And then it'll execute that transfer in stage 2. So if I was to execute that notebook in stage 2, say stage 2P, I would see Clever, I would see the Insights data, but I also now see a digital activity data folder. And this digital activity data folder includes a schema table, which should contain both Clever and Insights data. And as that query is executing, I will mention one of the main steps for getting set up for the digital activity schema is that you need to provide some sort of mapping between the data. So here in the notebooks table, we illustrate what that mapping actually looks like, right? So for the schema mapping, how do you map one schema column to, say, in this case, the Microsoft Insights data source? Jumping back, cool. So I can see my schema table has queried, it's been populated. I can see all the standardized data using the schema format. I can also see the data source. So I can see this came from Microsoft Insights. And the nice thing is here, everything is in the same format. So this means I can build packages on top of these schemas. So that's a super brief demo. I'll let you play around with the code and try it yourself. On the roadmap, we're considering a number of groups of OEA schemas. Right now, digital activity is well underway for a number of OEA modules. We're currently working on a school information system schema, mostly starting with Ed5 as the ground zero. And on the radar is a learning outcomes schema, right? So basically trying to schematize all the major data sources in the education space. We're also working right now on building packages on top of these schemas to make packages very transferable across spaces. So anybody can run package code and get results on both test data, but also their production data as well. Quick recap of what we just went through. So I gave an overview of what the OEA schemas are. Basically, they're data standards to support education use cases. But for us, they really accelerate getting started in sharing OEA technical assets. I also gave a short demo of how to transfer two module data sources into the OEA schema. And all the instructions are given on GitHub. I gave a fast overview. And I also gave an overview of the roadmap into the future. That's everything, right? So happy to ask any questions. Feel free to email me if that's the case.